So let's just make this a very free-form kind of conversation and chime in as you feel passionate about something. And we'll start with a very high-level question, and that is, how do you structure your businesses for innovation today, and how has that changed in the last 10 years? In other words, I guess another way of saying that is, how do you structure yourself to be competitive?
Wow.
That's different from something.
I mean, just like in anything else, competition, is constantly moving target. As soon as somebody innovates, you have to react and respond to it. If the innovation looks like it's going to be sustainable, so just educating yourself on what's changed, from my perspective on a competitive landscape. And that takes a lot of communication with people, a lot of question asking, a lot of education as to what's out there. So, from a small rep firm's perspective, we've been and part of the discussion with Avnet today about their web-based tools. The death knell of the manufacturer's rep has been rung ever since I've been in it, in the mid '80s, and we rise and fall based on certain directions and principles that we represent take, or whole industries take, direct versus. But the one that was said that was actually going to put the final nail in the coffin was going to be the internet, because now engineers and customers could go and pull data down at all hours of the day or night, and that was going to eliminate the need for field salespeople and kind of cut back the sales force overhead. And what we found is that it's actually been an enhancement, because there's so much noise out there that we step in and differentiate. So we've innovated by making sure that we're completely automated as far as our tools are concerned. Our communication tools are constantly connected, iPads, notebooks, cell phones. So we can interpret something that somebody's found on the web that doesn't make sense. But it's not exactly the answer to the question you asked, but education and communications, being aware of what's changed, is the first step in innovating, because you have to know what needs to be done next.
Anybody else want to jump in on that one?
Well, everything, it started with the terminology lean manufacturing, but you just drop the manufacturing now. Anything that you're doing, you're looking to streamline the process. You're looking to make lean out of it. So, and besides technology, I mean, yeah, absolutely the technology, the speeds and things of that nature, and just leaning every single process. When we started learning about how to lean our manufacturing processes, then we turned around and looked at ourselves, our company, administratively. How you handle a piece of paper, what you do with that piece of paper, how many times you touch that piece of paper, who all touches it, and how do you try to eliminate that and any other type of process. Everything is a process that you do. And we've been going process by process, whether it's purchasing, whether it's sales, whether it's anything, accounting, all of that, and streamlining and leaning it out.
Anybody else?
Well, I don't know, that's in our case a structured process. If you're a small company, you have to be innovative, otherwise, you will not survive. We are 24 years in business now. So really we like to carefully listen to certain customers and make investment even if it is early on and not a proved market yet. So in other words, you put aside some money which may be in error, not returning investment, right? But some of that may very well return investment, and you end up as a winner and compete, maybe even have a unique product worldwide.
Can anybody sort of quantify how much more productive you are today than you were 5 or 10 years ago in percentage terms?
I would say that we've probably tripled sales with the same amount of employees.
In 10 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, admittedly, we were pretty inefficient, but we've kind of tripled our sales, but we've got a third of the employees we used to have. So,
I would
shows you how inefficient we were, really.
That's pretty consistent with what we've experienced. So we've increased sales a couple of fold with fewer people.
In manufacturing, is that a result of lean or automation or both?
Both.
Both.
Okay. Yeah, because our company, we fix things, we repair. So it's very difficult to automate, right? Because you don't know what's wrong with it when it comes in the door, and you can't build an assembly line. So the way we have to stay up with the competition is what we're finding is everybody can repair it to some degree, but we have to have all those IT links to be able to communicate back and forth with the customer. So when you do fix it, you can tell them immediately what was wrong. It gets fed back to engineering, then they might be able to fix the design, which we invariably find, surprisingly. And it can get fed back to the CM. So you're putting that cap on backwards, and it might have gotten through the test process somehow. So that IT piece on the front end is just so critical. And you have to stay ahead with that to stay competitive.
So manufacturing efficiencies are fairly straightforward, and improvement is always continuous. I think it was at your company, Rich, where you were showing a pick-and-place machine that does something like 3,000...
30 to 40,000 components per hour versus... We have 7 lines now. 5 of them are in the 2,000 to 3,000 range, and we've now started this year our investments to take everything to the next plateau. So 30 to 40,000. I mean, they have machines that go a lot faster than that, but being a contract manufacturer, you need the flexibility of the machine to be able to rapidly change over from product to product to product. So some of the machines that might be doing 100,000 components an hour are not cost effective when you're sitting there trying to change over as rapidly as we do from customer to customer, product to product. But yeah, that's a great niche, and as I explained, we used to do the hundreds and low thousands of product lines. Then there's the hundreds of thousands, and then there's the millions of your cell phones, and the hundreds of thousands and millions are usually overseas, and we're now finding that we can be very competitive in that hundreds of thousands. I mean, this is all new to us. We're just starting our bidding, but we're getting a lot of good feedback. We're off by a small percentage, and that's where we're trying to come up with the cost of dealing with overseas and show how that would offset that small percentage that we're off in our bid process.
Yeah. Now, Ken, you talked about internet and productivity through use of the internet, wireless networks, and so on and so forth. So, and we talked a little bit in Dave's presentation today, and Rob's about how Avnet's using the internet to streamline operations, give you more visibility and metrics into what's going on. Are you guys leveraging technology in other ways other than back office and ordering and manufacturing? How about in design, other than sort of the usual EDA answer?
Well, you're typically driven by the technology and suppliers you have, right? I mean, someone like Xilinx will, graduate you into a next tool, and just staying with that supplier, you have to accept that development cycle and the development support and tools and so on. I think what has changed more in the last 10 years, right, is that we are able to structure our processor around system and even cloud nowadays, right, and really drive the point of detecting any issue or problem early on in engineering design, and as early as possible with components and boards, and before it becomes a sub-assembly, and before it is shipped, right? So it is supported by tools which really didn't well exist 10 years ago. So it's really acceptance of those tools, implementation, right?
So you mentioned the cloud. That means a lot of things to different people.
Right.
How do you use it?
Well, we started by using it as a server, a database server for our customers, because products go through many soft changes and updates. So worldwide, we do not supply any more updates. We just let our customer know where to go, and there are server directories where they are allowed to go and take the update which belongs to them, perform it themselves, right? But of course, we are looking at cloud services, across all the other, PLM and MRP and of course, accounting and so on.
Is anybody else here leveraging the cloud that aggressively, or do you still have that worry that your data is out there, it's going to get hacked someday, and you're going to be screwed? Or is
I don't think it matters where it is on a computer.
Yeah.
The computer's at your place or the computer's somewhere else. I don't think that wouldn't be our concern. And we've been using it probably for 10, 12 years, where we've been communicating with satellite operations, and they just come in via the internet, and they have a virtual site that they go into that then hunts and pecks throughout all our different servers, and so we've been able to manipulate where employees are located and whatnot, and how they do work with us. And also the same way that you're talking when it comes to the engineering and putting up all the drawing packages and whatnot on sites that the customer can just access.
In our case, it goes to Rich's lean. As a small business, I was spending every 3 years I was spending somewhere between $45,000 and $50,000 in infrastructure. I hosted my own Exchange server, BlackBerry Enterprise server. All of that was internally. I had to manage it. I had to manage the IT company that came in to manage it. And I'm a sales guy at the end of the day. I mean, my value proposition to my partners and my principal base is my effectiveness in the field. So when I made the decision to move that to the cloud, I changed the overhead from a time perspective. I changed it from a cost perspective, which allowed me to buy iPads and new notebook computers for everybody, which allows me to sit in front of an engineer and condense the cycle time from a design perspective. I can pull up the iPad principal's website, find the component, send a data sheet before they even get back to their desk. Where before that existed, there was a lag of at least 8 hours till I got back to my computer. And previously, there was a lag of a couple of days until I could get it out of a principal I represent as a warehouse. So this, from where I fit into the ecosystem, from a sales guy sitting in front of an engineer helping him support his design, the technology use helps everybody accelerate the process. So everybody upstream from me that I represent that provides those tools, allows me to sit down with an engineer, and when you consider all the spokes on the wheel that are doing that, I believe it's driving innovation from a perspective that it's consolidating or compressing the cycle time for design. Where somebody can get something designed, built out into the marketplace, and then start to get the feedback on where the improvements need to come. So if that makes sense,
Yeah.
There's the lean part of it was I get rid of the expense from a time and cost overhead perspective, and then on the innovative side I get to use tools I wouldn't traditionally been able to use, and the cloud enhances that.
Michelle, let me ask you, bring you into the conversation. How do you guys use the cloud, or how do you leverage technology in ways to make you more productive?
Well, we are actually Avnet's non-traditional customer. We are an OEM manufacturer, and we use very little electronics in our business. So maybe 5% of what we do is actually electronics equipment. Avnet has become a very large partner of ours, though, in the electronics that we do purchase, though. Basically, our engineers, we don't really design new electronics products that often. We just undergo redesigns of what already exists, and they really use the resources that are available to them, such as the internet, but we don't have in-house electronic engineers. We really outsource all of that through recommended resources from Avnet and using their services.
To Avnet's kind of like a third arm.
They are.
So here's something that just bowls me over, and I'm blanking on his name, but if you study productivity numbers from the U.S. Labor Department, the industries that have adopted technology to get more efficient over the last 25 years are our industry. And then the improvements drop off big time in almost every other industry, which is amazing to me, especially like medicine. And there's a guy, I think he's at Princeton, and he studied this, and he's written papers on it. Do you think that because obviously that's key to selling more products in this business, is getting other industries to get on the productivity bandwagon. Do you think that is a continuing dilemma for the electronics industry, or are you in your own businesses seeing new application areas in new industry segments start to embrace electronics technology?
I think we're still seeing it. I mean, it's all comes down to the ROI. Anybody will buy anything if you can get that return on investment quick enough. So I
think there's lots of different definitions. So the innovation, how it's utilized, and the productivity. I actually think a lot of our customers, not all, but a lot, are less innovative than they've been because, not necessarily the ROI, but they're just not spending any money on anything, which is unfortunate. So I'm curious to read that report because I wonder how much of the productivity is just from outsourcing internationally to low-cost countries versus through technological innovation. So I don't know the answer to that, but I think a number of we have two distinct groups of customers. We have customers that are innovative and we have customers that are not innovative. And I would say by far, the customers that are not innovative tend to be the Fortune 100 type companies.
That are not innovative.
That are not innovative.
because they're not struggling to survive like the smaller ones.
And they don't seem real willing to invest in change. So I mean, we can when we design a product,
they can make a move it overseas, and they've saved so much money that they don't need to streamline anything else.
But just in velocity, I mean, our organizations could design a board, document the board, buy the parts, and build it before they can approve the drawings.
Right.
So there's some regulation, there's some
red tape
process that these big companies are just struggling to get through.
I think there's a lot of legacy that they haven't stripped out, things that are no longer applicable, but that's the way they've always done it. You know, that's one of the reasons entrepreneurial, entities can outpace the large organizations.
That's why the IRS is so big. They still have a lot of regulations.
Exactly.
that they don't need anymore.
They're quicker on their feet. Now, when you were talking about medicine, were you talking about the application of medicine or the medical equipment industry? When you mentioned that they had...
Not so much the medical equipment industry, but the back office, IT kinds of stuff. I mean, you go into a clinic or your doctor's now, and you're still filling out paper form. That's ridiculous. Yeah.
I mean, it gets into the realm of political, but I think a lot of it has to do with the costs associated with being in certain industries. That, the regulatory overhead, the burdens. You have a finite amount of cash, and you can only do so many things with it. And if you're burdened from a regulatory perspective, then you can't, spend the capital or invest the capital required to upgrade. So you don't. I got doctors that walk around with tablet computers and just punch in things, and I have other ones that are still using, the paper source. And I think it's a matter of just cash flow and how many dollars they can allocate to each one of their functions. And if their primary function is patient care, they got to spend the resources on that, and it's not back office stuff. Until they can be shown that this is going to streamline this for you, this will cut your costs, it'll allow you to be more efficient, see more patients, have a higher percentage of accurate diagnosis and treatment. I think until you demonstrate the value proposition to it, they're not going to spend the money unless they just naturally do those types of things.
I think that might be generational too.
Very well may be.
It's the people that have grown up with the technology. Because otherwise, if you haven't grown up with technology and you don't know it, now you got to hire somebody that's an expert at it, who charges a lot of money, and that's how you're going to set up your infrastructure. So I would say a lot of it's is also dealt around how, because you're talking one-man shops with a small group of office people and whatnot. If that one man isn't also an IT expert, I can't see it happening, because otherwise you're going to spend a lot of money to hire somebody to set all that up, do it, run it, maintain it.
I think back to your question, I think technology is absolutely on par. As we talked about earlier, the sensor technology. When you see big industry like IBM focusing their network capabilities of managing sensor inputs, a stream up in Connecticut, a sensor comes off and then somehow it's going to impact the watershed down in New Jersey. I mean, it's just going to pull it along. It's got to pull along. Look at smart metering. Look at all those traditional, industries. Maybe it's not happening as fast, but I think back to the earlier point, it's probably just going to proliferate, especially with mobility. I think it's going to have to proliferate. I mean, you're getting it in your refrigerator. You get a scanner right there. You have an LCD. I mean, it's all going to kind of continue to. So we'll catch up. I don't know.
Do you guys think that there's an innovation gene, and that there's only 20% or 10% or 50% of the population that sort of have that? because we all run into people who do things just the way it's always been done, and they don't, because that's the way it's been done. And then there are other people who are always trying to do something better, but that's anecdotal.
Maybe not just a gene, but just a culture. So like GE didn't move their X-ray business to China for innovation. So there's a culture there too that I don't know is very innovative. Now at the same time, these companies are big enough that they have huge innovations.
They
But-
create and design new stuff, but
They don't use it.
They don't use it, right.
Well, a lot of them outsource a lot of that. I mean, if you look at Procter & Gamble, they did the whole kind of, I'll use the current term crowdsourcing, but they have an open innovation structure. They have 2,000 innovation engineers inside the company. They build 6,000 prototypes a year, but they access third party to be contributors to their innovation efforts. And it's like 1 million different people in their network. So they go outside for that and to kind of pull that in, get the best of the best. And they deliver things to the market like being able to write on a Pringle. They did that by finding some guy in Italy who knew how to write on use a laser printer for food. And that they found through that kind of outsourcing piece that they did. So that's kind of what kicked off a lot of their spreading it out and going outside to innovate inside, if you will.
But the culture of innovation, if I could expand on that, is I think it's probably entrepreneurial. It's probably more leadership focused than by a committee. And I don't know that at the companies I was referencing, there's a reward system that rewards innovation or risks. It's almost the opposite. So if you look at like the military avionics aerospace industry, our biggest challenge is obsolescence. And I would say there's virtually no effort into resolving obsolescence. All the effort's going into not getting obsolescence into the system, not eliminating it through redesign or innovation, but more bureaucracy, legacy processes, because that's the lower risk path. And I think companies either have that culture or they don't. Or segments within the business.
Quite true for my opinion. The Fortune 100 companies have the market, and if they enjoy that market, they may try to do a few things to improve it, mostly through sales and not necessarily through innovation of the product, right? Because they are not seeing that, they don't need to. We have to, in order to enter that market, we have to innovate. So it's really a drive. In order to survive, you have to innovate. That's the way how we have to carry forward. And of course, I do believe that there is some element of gene in innovation. There are some people who are more able to do it than others. But the drive, the need for is number one for me.
Do you structure your company or your communications within your company to foster that in some special way?
We try to collect that information. The first-hand information from the customer is the most valuable piece, which gets lost in translational, conversations and so on. So we have structured ways to have reports of all of those contacts, from service to sales and so on, so that we catch a question: can this be done? And if you start correlating this with some others who are asked the same, you are onto something. You start investigating, right? And then, in our case, we can go back and say, okay, what if there would be a product and so on, right? So you ride that channel.
I think if you were to, this could go really wide, but I think if you were to interview individuals that are selecting talent at Apple, or any one of the innovative technology companies that stick into that arena, you'd find that they would be looking for people that are not necessarily conformists, individuals that are, to your cultural point, comfortable with taking risk and putting new ideas on the table. And they're doing that. They're doing that level of screening, A, because they can, and B, because it's a lot less expensive than reprogramming individuals that have come through an educational system that teaches people to be conforming, that keeps them inside of rails and paints color inside the lines, and if you follow the logic. So it's probably a lot less expensive to put together some type of an algorithm to determine the likelihood that somebody's going to have that gene than it is to deprogram them from 18 to years of conforming education. I mean, that's the way I see it. And I've actually had some conversations with people that's what they've said, that it's a lot easier to select somebody that's nuts, that's going to get outside the box, to use a beat phrase, than it is to take somebody that's been through a shaping process and reshape them, because they're already on a path that's very difficult to knock them from.
We had Steve Wozniak keynote Embedded Systems Conference, Silicon Valley, and he made that very point, because he does a lot of secret volunteer work in local schools, and so he's seen it firsthand.
I lifted that from Steve Wozniak.
Yeah.
I actually had a conversation with him, but it's a long story, but that's one of the people I was referring to. That's where Apple has done it.
Yeah, there are many ways to skin a cat, solve a
Right.
problem, so on and so forth. But we teach kids to do it one way. So, launching into the next sort of question, how do we change that? Number one, and number two, right now, are you getting in your recruitment engineering teams, technologists, the right skill sets coming out of college?
Well, we just have a advertisement, opening and on the web and elsewhere. And I remember not even being sure whether we should put qualification in terms of education as a demand. We finally did, but we look at years of experience on the job and a certain kind of experience and so on as number one, because schools don't really come out with what we can readily use in design. Maybe surprisingly enough, or maybe on a high level, if you are lucky to find a very practical PhD who is not looking for academic employment, if he has a practical, innovative mind, they could do a great job, because they have learned how to use those FPGAs, programmable logic, and so on.
I think in terms of the schools, we do have good engineering schools. We're able to recruit good electrical engineers, good mechanical engineers. They're available. Nothing beats workplace experience, of course, but I think our schools, from an engineering standpoint, are doing a good job of educating. Now, whether they're innovative or not, I think that gets back to that question of the gene. Certain ones are, certain ones aren't.
Yeah, and can you make somebody who isn't?
I don't think so. I think it's something in your genetics, in your makeup, in your personality.
But I also think in a company, if you can build a culture to encourage that,
You can
once
make
you
it
get,
boom.
once you get a room full of
Right.
people, and usually there's one or two leaders, and if it's the boss and they're dominant and they're rigid, everyone shuts up. I've seen it. But then if you get a different leader that says, just bring in some pizzas, let's talk brainstorm for a couple hours. Next thing you know, people are banging out ideas, especially if you implement them. And especially out on like a production floor. And then it becomes contagious. So, but I agree. I think you have out-of-the-box thinkers, and some people just would rather not think. They just want to show up to work, do their job, and go home. But if you can create that culture, and you get that momentum going, it's a pretty good thing to observe.
It sounds like you guys order a lot of pizza.
Yeah, not enough.
Do we need to completely, and this is a higher level question, but do we need to completely overhaul how we educate kids in this country? Or is that impossible?
I think that answer is right in front of us. We have a crisis in the country of people that are conformists, that are kind of frozen in the headlights at this point. If you just look at the statistics, we're behind all the developing nations in almost all key categories. And sometimes we're down in 10th, 11th, 12th ranking. That all said, there's on the flip side of that, there's a whole lot of innovation and a whole lot of talent that's out there. Some of it's by chance and some of it's by careful cultivation or selection. So how do we back annotate the success and how it was achieved and get it back into the primary, school and into the secondary? But we know the results are what we're watching. The intellectual drain occur. That's why China, when I heard the statistic at the top of the panel, when the session was open, we have 35% innovation still left in the United States. How scary a comment is that to make? 35% still left in the United States. That means it's dropping. It doesn't mean it's growing. It means we were at some point we were at 80%, and then we went to 60%. I was in a session 3 years ago when Phil Gallagher was talking about 60% of innovation was still in the U.S. Now it's 35. That's frightening. Why is that?
It's all the outsourcing.
It's outsourcing, but nothing exists in a vacuum. If there wasn't some place to outsource it to.
Well, but it was the economics of it, though. It wasn't, in other words, we created the intelligence everywhere else because of the value that it took to get those people is so much less expensive.
We created the atmosphere.
Correct.
They supplied the labor, right? I mean, we could have created the atmosphere and it wouldn't have gone anywhere because there wouldn't have been the labor to draw upon. The Chinese revamped their educational systems. The Indians back in the 1980s revamped their educational systems. They saw an opportunity. And I mean, it's left open to debate how innovative or creative they really are. But nonetheless, we're able to outsource jobs to those locations because the talent exists there to take those jobs.
At a much lesser rate.
It's a lower rate, but again, that's part of an educational process.
Until everything equalizes, they're catching up. So there's nothing that's going to stop that. The only thing that can happen is hopefully at some point it equalizes. That their rates get more expensive. They start wanting to have all iPhones in every pocket and every house and everything, and it all starts to catch up, and that would level things off. But I can't see anything that's going to stop that until it happens.
I hear you, but that also is
too big a ball.
That we've kept pace educationally. That when that equilibrium is struck, that we have the resources domestically to fill those jobs, and the data suggests otherwise. That we're not educating engineers at the rate that India and China are, or other developing nations. That we have a lot of money.
We're not educating them, or they don't want to be educated. I don't think it's anybody's holding them back. It's just people aren't wanting to do that.
To your point, it's kind of circular because the jobs aren't here because they've left.
Right.
So why should I go get an engineering degree if I'm not going to have an opportunity when I leave school?
But with the education point, I mean, like just this week or 2 weeks ago, whatever, I should know. My kids went back into.
You're busy.
8th and 5th grade, and I talk about this with my wife all the time. Innovation. I don't talk to her about innovation, but innovation never stops. It continues. So you graduate with a degree and you know something, but unless you keep learning, you don't keep up, and you're not going to learn in the 4 years of college anything about what you're going to do because it's going to change. Somehow, I feel like in my life I benefited from it. I don't know if it's a gene or a culture or a luck from education or teachers or whatever, but I learned how to learn when I learned. And my kids have no idea how to learn. They don't know how to filter information, get to the relevant topics, where to learn. Either maybe just they're bombarded by everything. I don't know if it's the educational process or the environment, but they don't know how to educate themselves or keep pace, I guess. That's what scares the hell out of me.
I think that's the crux of the biscuit right there. I mean, how do you teach somebody to actually learn something? You can put data in front of them and they can memorize it and pass a test and move to the next level, but how do you actually teach them that when that doesn't exist? How do they teach themselves something?
I have made a interesting observation. First of all, being coming from Europe, I observe language differently and look at how it is written and so on. I've noticed that our bit older engineers or people, employees in the company, command English writing significantly better than younger ones, to the point that there have been correspondence in the past I was not proud of going out, right? And very difficult. So basically, we are missing basics in school, starting from young age. And of course, it's a structural problem, and it grows. Now we end up having actually great universities, but for the life of me, I don't understand why do we educate foreign students who then leave, take all that know-how, and go to their countries and compete with us. The other point is how come that all the interesting technology, MIT, my daughter finished MIT, is actually mostly available online. I mean, this is all intellectual property. Ultimately, this is all taxpayer money someplace, right? Why? So in other words, there's a whole atmosphere which is wrong, would have to change from beginning early on to universities to actually get us back in a better education.
Are we learning the lessons as an industry that offshoring can only benefit certain very high volume industries and that we have to control our own manufacturing if we're going to do design better? Or is that just a function of your particular markets and the size of your companies?
I guess it's tough to compare it to something you haven't done. I am in this market and I am of this size, so it's difficult for me to speak what the other side would be. I would hope, on one hand, you hope you get big enough, you want to make all that great money and all that neat stuff, but from what you see, it seems like every time it does get that large and that big a situation, a lot of it goes overseas, because again, I don't, it's the red tape. I don't think they can cut it. The only thing they can do is, well, just find a large dollar savings somewhere else instead of everything saving money. This last recession we went through, everybody in our company and everything that happened all went down. We all took a cut. We all did it together, and we all came out of it together. I don't think you can do those kinds of things in the larger organizations and whatnot, but I can't speak for them. That's the only thing I can kind of predict that I see it out of these organizations. They just can't get out of their own way. And the only way they're going to save money is just shut something down and send it somewhere else versus try to make that place better. Unions started a lot of this, got the country out of treating employees terribly and all that kind of stuff. Well, I think they went past their usage. I think they overstepped their bounds, and I think they're a major reason why we're going in this direction, because that portion of the labor pool took over, and it literally choked themselves out of it.
I think you're right, Rich. It started with that, and it just kept going in
It was
that direction.
It was a great thing when it started, and it made complete sense.
Sure.
I think it got out of control, though, finally.
I agree with you. 98% and the 2% reservation is nothing exists in a vacuum. The unions could not have done what they had done and gained the strength that they gained without malfeasance in management.
Sure.
Okay, so we have a crisis of management in this country, in my opinion, as much as we have a crisis in labor. Because if you look at the automotive industry, and the Japanese were able to compete with us on our soil. Manufacturing plants in Tennessee and Kentucky and Ohio.
Right.
Okay, with non-union labor.
Yep.
Okay, which everybody wants to point to, but when you look at how management did it, they pulled it off. Now, Detroit was burdened with unions, but they kind of created the monster that eventually shut them down. If you follow the logic,
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the.
They allowed themselves to be taken advantage of,
because it was symbiotic. They were both doing okay. The consumer was suffering. That stayed with them. The consumers that didn't suffer were the ones that went to the Japanese. Okay, they moved into a different direction, and until the pain was felt, nothing changed, nothing shifted.
But I think the issue there. I'm sorry.
But I mean, Rich has said it many times, and we like to call ourselves capitalists and free market people, but that assumes that the playing field's level and the rules exist everywhere universally, and the rules don't exist the way they exist here offshore. There are government subsidies, and there are regulatory issues that don't exist, or environmental issues that don't exist. So it's a lot more expensive to do business in the United States than it is to do business offshore. And probably everybody in the room, making an assumption, has a 401k or some kind of investment portfolio where there is shareholdership of companies that have moved things offshore, and you're happy you have them because they're more profitable because they move things offshore. So we don't have to have one problem to solve. We have a mosaic of problems to solve. It's like a Rubik's Cube.
Yeah, we've done an awful job at protecting. There's a lot of protectionism that goes on in this. I mean, China is built to be a manufacturing economy. We're not built to be a manufacturer. We've transitioned to this service economy. Seemed to work for IBM. Maybe that's what everybody's following, right? Be a services business, and you get out of all this other mess and higher profitability. But at the end of the day, there's people that need to do secondary operations here, and we need to be cost effective to do that, right? So we can compete with them and be, you know, not face this, you know, global hemispheric irresponsibility of building over there and shipping it back here, right? From a green perspective, that's another big push that's being, you know, put out there. Is it's just irresponsible anymore to go do that from a fuel consumption and a fossil fuel perspective. So, yeah, I don't know. It seems like we're caught between what we want to be. And the schools, let's face it, their market, they gear curriculums towards what that market looks like. They need people to come out of school and get a job that fulfills the desire for people to come in and go to that school. So I think that stuck in the middle is kind of where we get confused at the academic level.
Anybody else want to chime in before I let you go?
I'm sorry, the only thing I was going to say was I think there's a perspective of longevity. So, you know, how long are you putting a plan together for? Is it 6 months? Is it until you can get on to the next job? Is it until the stock price hits $35? Or is it in line with a longer term 100-year vision? And I think very often it's just
Day trading.
We become short-term thinkers.
Everything's day trading.
everything's just get me out of this quick. Let me make my bang. Let me outsource it. Let me on paper save 50%, and I'm out of here. And they never get it.
I'd like to follow on to an earlier discussion that was going on about secondary operations, state subsidies. So are there entities out there that, and I think about Marty's need, because everything needs to be hand-touched and fixed, are there flexible human resource temporary staff organizations that can move that back and forth to your organization or to his organization that may be state subsidized? Just trying to piece this together.
Absolutely. I mean, I watched a CNN segment on manufacturing was in Minnesota or Wisconsin. It was a tech company that could not get qualified programmers. They didn't need degreed engineers. They needed people to program CNC machines, and they could program pick and place and that type of thing.
Right.
There were some other skill level jobs that they had ads in the paper. You saw that?
Yeah.
And ultimately, you know, they narrowed touch on the topic that 30, 40 years ago we sold the bill of goods to the United States, to our parents raising kids at the time, that if you didn't attend a college and get a 4-year degree, you're going to live a miserable, subpar life. Like the trades were discouraged. You know,
And now the opposite is true.
and now, and now it's, you know, so we not only have an educational issue on the intellectual side of it, we also have an educational problem, you know, on the skilled trades side. And I think it's to a point. It's popular to do. You know, we student body right, student body left, without really thinking about why we're doing it. You know, and so I think we have. You know, to your point, we may not have the labor pool to be able to do those secondary ops because they're not, you know, spatially capable of doing it. They don't have the dexterity to do it. They don't understand fundamentally how to.
I mean, our region, there's a lot of technical schools, and that's why I wonder. It seems like an interesting business model for somebody to develop. Hey, let me go to the state. Let me get some subsidies from the state. I'll have a flexible group that can go be cost effective to help him, everybody else that does secondary operations. And we'll have it as a flexible force, so he doesn't have to pay him all the time.
So I indirectly worked on a program that was an entrepreneurial venture that was going to use prison labor. And the idea was the people in prison have bills they need to pay, you know, spousal payments or whatever, and they're not happening in prison. So, you know, there's a rate, they get a portion and the state gets a portion. By the time the state, who had to approve all this, put all their regulations and red tape on it, and the environment that these prisoners needed to work in, and the payments to the politicians in the local areas, they were more expensive than just hiring people, substantially, like double the price.
That's scary.
So I'm all for the idea, but I haven't seen government being able to do anything.
They
real
can't get out of their own
efficiently.
way.
But I'm going to write that down because I am an entrepreneur. So I'll poll these gentlemen in the room. Where do you have a hard time filling slots? And I'll set up a business.
It seems like a
and
social
find and
network
fill,
would be
you know.
easy to kind of plug and play. I mean, there's a lot of technology to apply to pull that together. And maybe New Jersey needs its own protectionism.
Well, that's why I asked if
Yeah.
your office, if you've been contacted by Christie's office, because you would think that he would have from the time he entered into the office, and I love the guy, to this point, he would have been systematically working through every manufacturing company in the state. What can I do to help? You know, what are the impediments? What are the roadblocks? You know, what do we need to do differently so you can expand? I mean, that was the nature of the question at the end of the day. You know, is that going on?
They all know the answer, it's their job. If they give the right answer, they're gonna lose their job. Because half of that's not needed.
Exactly.
Half of that government's waste.
So there we are. That's why we are where we are.
Right.
You,
We created that monster too.
if you standardize the tax code, how many people don't work that are tax
Yeah,
accountants, tax
IRS.
lawyers, the IRS? You know, there's these self-perpetuating systems that are in place to keep us where we are. How do you break that?
Well, it sounds like we have a ton of challenges ahead of us. The good news is you've effectively just signed yourself up to join us on the Drive for Innovation, because I think we should take this on the road, and everywhere we go, we're going to have this panel. We'll have an audience, we'll have governors, we'll have state senators, and we will single-handedly
Fix this thing.
fix this thing.
Fix America.